I worked in an elderly care home doing the night shift. We had a resident, a lady named Elizabeth, who had Alzheimer's. She came down, and which was scary in itself as she was wearing her long nightgown. We had a short chat in which she told me all about living in Sheffield, her parents, and her love of church music. In the midst of it, I had to stop the chat for a bit to check on everyone and assist with some toileting. It was going to be a quick one, as we are not a huge home. We only had about 12 residents. When I passed Elizabeth's room, which she shared with another lady, I found Elizabeth in bed, having passed away. To this day, I don't know if I had been chatting with her ghost, or if she had gone back to bed and then passed. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the phone, frozen. Longtime ER nurse here, and I've witnessed scenes that stay with you. One particularly poignant night, we were attending to a patient in the ER, awaiting an available bed upstairs. The patient, whom I'll call Edith, was in her late 80s and nearing the end of her life. She had chosen a DNR status, and our primary aim was to ensure her comfort. Her exact diagnosis escapes me now, but her condition was grave, deeply unresponsive, yet breathing on her own. She was already experiencing significant heart rhythm issues. It seemed she had maybe an hour or two left at most. With no family present, our team took turns checking in on her frequently. At one point, I looked down the hall and noticed Edith standing at the door to her room, gazing towards the nurse's station. She then told us that she was quite hungry. Given the circumstances, I absolutely wasn't going to default to the usual, doctor's orders prevent you from eating right now. Instead, we ventured to the cafeteria and gathered an assortment of foods, aiming to satisfy whatever craving Edith might have had. We set up a makeshift dining area at the door to her room, allowing us to keep an eye on her. Taking turns, we sat with Edith as she enjoyed her meal, engaging in light, carefree conversation as if the gravity of the moment was miles away. Sometime later, Edith indicated she was feeling tired and wished to lie back down. Gently, we assisted her back into bed, where she quickly drifted back to sleep. Within the hour, Edith had passed away. That night, as with many others in the ER, reminded me of the profound humanity intertwined with the technical and often emotionally taxing work of nursing. It was a moment where simple acts of kindness and understanding transcended the clinical setting, offering a patient not just medical care, but dignity and compassion in her final hours. I work overnight as an RN in a pediatric ICU floor. Most of our patients are sedated, paralyzed, dependent on tracheostomies and ventilators, etc. One side of the floor is dedicated to our acute trauma kids, severe accidents, drownings, etc., while the other side houses our chronic patients. These are usually the kids we refer to as our frequent flyers. When they're not in the hospital, they live at a facility that provides 24-hour medical care. Once they get discharged, it's only a matter of time before they're back, usually due to respiratory failure, in about 2 to 3 weeks. Most of them do not have parents that visit or call. They just lay there, staring at the ceiling, receiving their medications and tube feedings. It's very depressing on that side. One of my patients was a chronic kid. She was 5 years old. Her medical history was incredibly complex. Trach and ventilator dependent, she was delayed, but with it, so to speak. Every time she was readmitted to our floor and I had her as a patient, she would smile the biggest smile when I'd walk in at the start of my shift. I made it a point to spend time in her room with her whenever I could, since she didn't have parents who came. I would do silly dances, sing her songs, and make her smile. Since she had a trach and was hooked to the vent, she wasn't able to make noise. So, when she would cry, it was silent, and you would just see the tears streaming down her face. She absolutely loved the movie Frozen. It always made her stop crying. If I would walk in and the movie had finished, she would tug on the sleeve of my scrubs to play it again, and I would. That was our thing. I didn't mind being on the chronic side as much when she was there. I care for all of my patients, but she held a special spot, and I believe she knew it. She was discharged back to the medical facility she lived at. It had been a while since she came back, this time, maybe 2 to 3 months. But when she did, she looked bad, worse than ever. She required way more oxygen than her usual baseline this time. She had lost a lot of weight. She was already very small for her age. Her eyes were sunken. It hurt me to see her that way. I did my dances and my songs, and she didn't smile. I would talk to her and she wouldn't react. She wasn't really tracking and following with her eyes. She wasn't herself anymore. She was clearly deteriorating. This was expected due to the multiple congenital issues she was suffering from. But still, it was hard to watch. She was there a few weeks and her prognosis was pretty poor. My last shift with her, she was hardly able to raise her arm. But she did, just to tug on my sleeve so I could put Frozen on. So I did. It was otherwise a regular night. I went home and slept, and woke up just in time to come back for my next shift. I was expecting to get my same patient assignment, and I saw I had the same room number, but the name was different. There was someone else in her room. I asked what happened, and their faces all fell as they told me she had coded that morning and they weren't able to revive her. She had passed away. I wasn't there. I was totally devastated. I held it together and I didn't cry, but this shift had a heaviness to it. I was really sad, and it just felt like I was drifting from room to room the whole night. Fast forward to 3 a.m., I needed to go into that room to start the new patient's tube feed. There was nothing on the TV, but the patient was awake. I put on the movie Coco so he would at least have some background noise. As I was starting the pump, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and had goosebumps down my arms. Just as I was about to leave, I felt it. 2 tugs on my sleeve. I froze, initially feeling really afraid, but then I was overcome by the most overwhelming rush of emotion all at once. I ran to the bathroom and cried so hard, it took me a while to gather myself. I splashed water on my face and went back to my desk to chart, trying to shake off what had happened and just tell myself it was impossible. My grief was causing me to imagine things. At 4 a.m., exactly 1 hour later, the feed was done. I went to the room and paused at the doorway. Frozen was playing. I had only put Coco on 1 hour ago. It couldn't have been finished. I stood there in disbelief. I've never really had anything paranormal happen to me before, but in that moment, I had the warmest feeling. I just knew she was trying to tell me she was okay or something. I can't explain it, but it made me smile. While at university, I lived directly next to a purportedly haunted cemetery in what is considered one of the most haunted cities in the country. The odd part about my living situation was that the basement apartment I stayed in was uniquely situated below the cemetery, so you could see tombstones at about eye level from the windows. One night during the winter, I woke up freezing cold as my sheet had fallen off my futon. I was sleeping on the floor. I rolled over to grab it and realized that there was a man standing and looking out of the window not 4 feet away from me. I could see details of his face clear as day, as there was a floodlight shining through the slats of my blinds. He had glasses and a mustache and appeared to be in his mid-40s. I'm not sure why, but this didn't freak me out, and I must have chalked it up to thinking I was dreaming because I grabbed the sheet and went back to sleep without a second thought. A few hours later, I woke up again to find my sheet missing, but this time it was about 30 feet away in my kitchen, which is visible from where I slept. The man was now standing and staring the opposite way towards the cemetery, and this time I really paid attention. I sat up and said hello, but received no response. After staring at him standing there for what seemed to be minutes, he moved out of sight in a very odd manner, which could only be described as sliding on ice. After half an hour of sitting and staring and saying hello to the room, I finally mustered up the courage to flip on my lights and go to the kitchen to retrieve my sheet, only to confirm that, yes, nobody was in the apartment with me. The entire situation was bizarrely serene. I didn't feel any fear at all, just confusion. I managed an internet cafe/comic shop that was in a 150-year-old building. On this particular day, we had a bunch of people who wanted to keep gaming after hours, so we closed quite late. After finally getting all the customers out after midnight, I was doing some paperwork in the back office. I was alone in the store for about an hour when I looked up at the two-way mirror and saw someone standing near the front of the store. Most of the lights were off, but I could clearly see a man wearing a fedora standing by our front cash register. The building we were in was quite large, and the distance from the back of the store to the front was close to 100 feet. We had big bay windows backlit by street lamps, and I could clearly see a person standing as if they were waiting for service. I cursed myself for forgetting to lock the door, walked down the hallway, and out into the main store area, but there was no one there. I double-checked the door, locked tight. I felt like I wasn't alone, but after flicking the lights back on, it seemed I was alone indeed. Lights off, back to my papers. Half an hour later, I felt myself being watched. I looked up at the mirrored window again and saw the same shadow, except this time it was a few feet to the left and much closer. A man, on the short side and wearing a fedora, facing the security window. I immediately grabbed my keys and left out the back door.